Welcome everyone to our second ACM Chicago webinar of the calendar 2022-2023 year. And I hope everything is going well with you all. So my name is Alvin Chin. I'm the chair of ACM Chicago and also the chair of IEEE Computer Society Chicago. So this is a joint event which we've done pretty much every month or so. So tonight we have Charlie Catlett, our speaker from Argonne National Lab, and just give some brief introductions before we have Charlie to speak. All right, so first of all, a little bit about IEEE Computer Society Chicago, for those who don't know about this chapter. So it's the Chicago chapter of the IEEE Computer Society. Actually, now we hold mostly monthly meetings now because we are now doing joint with ACM Chicago, and our topics that we deal with are software, hardware, computing, AI, big data, cloud computing, cybersecurity. So like I said earlier, I'm the chair. Our vice chair is Gina Martinez. And here are the links for the IEEE Computer Society if you're interested in learning more about what we do, and also regarding about some of our webinars and videos that we've done. So you have a YouTube channel. And if you want to be a part of IEEE Computer Society, you can also join at computer.org/membership/join. These slides will be provided afterwards, after the webinar. So, but if you want to, take a screenshot so you can remember those links, you can do so. Also want to acknowledge as well the host of this webinar, which is ACM Chicago. So for those of you who don't know ACM Chicago, we are the Chicago chapter of the Association for Computing Machinery. So basically ACM is kind of like the sister section or so of IEEE. So we do a lot of things, that are similar. So we have monthly meetings. We've been doing this for a while. We've been doing mostly online now since the beginning of the pandemic, although this year we did two actually in person at the Loyola campus in Evanston. So, and we hope to do that starting to go back in person or at least hybrid probably next year. Like I said earlier, I am the chair. Our vice chair is Mark. So Mark is on the line there. And our treasurer is Greg Newmark. Our website, chicagoacm.org, which you probably might have found where our meeting is. Probably most of you know it because of subscribing to meetup.com/ACM Chicago. We also have social media presence on Facebook, on Twitter, LinkedIn, and we have our webinars and meetings that are recorded. And this one is being recorded too as well, and it will be put onto our YouTube channel. So you can go to bit.ly/ACMCHI video. And when there's a newest one that is uploaded there, you'll get notified that there's a new video that you can see. If you want to be an ACM member, for example, if you want to get discounts, to ACM conferences or so, you can go to acm.org/membership. And I believe also too as well, you can also become a member through ACM Chicago, and you will become an ACM member as well. If you want more information, you can go to chicagoacm.org, and I believe there's a link there where you can sign up if you want to become an ACM Chicago member. All right, so for tonight's presentation, we have Charlie Catlett from Argonne National Lab. So I'll just give you a little bit briefly about him. So he is a senior computer scientist at Argonne National Lab and visiting scientist at University of Chicago's Mansueto Institute for Urban Innovation. He does research in urban data analytics, urban modeling, and the design and use of intelligent sensing and AI at the edge computing technologies that are embedded in the urban infrastructure and the environment. He led the NSF-funded Array of Things project to embed AI in urban, environmental, and emergency response settings. He was recognized as one of Chicago's Tech 50 technology leaders by Crain's Chicago Business in 2014. And also as well, he is a computer engineering graduate of UIUC, so Illinois at Urbana-Champaign. And so today he's going to be talking about artificially smart and trustworthy cities. Before we begin or so, if you have any questions for Charlie, you can type them in our Q&A, and then we will have a Q&A session after Charlie is finished probably around 6:45 or so. So you can put your questions in there for Charlie, and we will address them after Charlie finishes his talk. You'll get a copy of the recording, and as well, if you require a professional development hour certificate for this, that will be provided too as well. Okay, so without further ado, please give a warm welcome to Charlie. So Charlie,
Thanks, Alvin. I'm going to go ahead and share my screen here. So normally I have been for the last couple of years talking about our project, the Array of Things project in Chicago, which I did at a meeting the other day, and Alvin asked me to come here and talk about it. But I want to go beyond what we've done in the city, and so the title is a little bit narrower than what I'd like to talk about, and go beyond just what we've done in the city and talk about what we're doing now, which is beyond just cities, and how we're using AI and edge computing in these various projects, and talk about the infrastructure that we've built and where we're going with it. First of all, about 10 years ago, I was working with the city of Chicago and trying to understand what were opportunities for scientists to work with city government and community groups in cities. What were the challenges that different commissioners or department heads were faced with, and what might computer scientists and computer engineers do to help make the city better along various axes. And one of the things that happened in late 2011 is Chicago announced this project called the Smart Lighting Project. And the plan was, and they finished it, they did it, was to replace 300,000 streetlights with LEDs. When I heard that, I said to the chief sustainability officer at the time, Karen Weiger, I said, hey, could we, while you're rolling bucket trucks out and putting stuff up on poles, could we put something up too for scientific measurement, weather or air quality or something like that? And she said, that sounds pretty interesting. And so that started a conversation that eventually encompassed, almost every scientific discipline, several workshops that we had where we were just trying to answer this question, like if we could put a couple hundred devices up around the city on poles, what would they do? And so we talked to social scientists, we talked to transportation researchers, we talked to environmental scientists, climate scientists, and came up with a general idea to put several hundred devices throughout the city of Chicago that would be measuring various aspects of the environment. And one of the things that we learned really, early on was that some of the most interesting measurements are the ones where you can't buy an electronic sensor, and you actually have to have a human doing the observation. And so from the beginning of the project, we decided not to take the easier route, which was let's just slap some sensors together into a box and put them up on the pole, but let's see if we can put some computing out there on the pole and some microphones and cameras as well. And so we had this computer science challenge, and we also had this privacy and security challenge that we undertook, which was in some sense biting off more than maybe the National Science Foundation funded us to chew, but that's what we did. And so you can see the map on this screen of all the places we ended up putting devices. There were probably a couple hundred of these that we built. Most of them went into Chicago. I'll talk about some of the lessons learned here as we move along. The project was and still is, as it moves into different phases. Nowadays, we talk about the SAGE project, which is the successor to Array of Things. But there are many people involved, and as I said, from almost every discipline, scientific discipline. Here's our external advisory group. There are multiple former CIOs from the city of Chicago, their community organizers, CEOs from local companies, scientists, entrepreneurs. But beyond these folks, something like, I would say, between 60 and 75 people were actively involved in the project. And Pete and Raj, who I just put up there, have been my key partners in designing and building this infrastructure. But really, it's a huge project, and the SAGE project is even larger than this one. So lots of people involved in helping us figure out what we should build, helping us figure out how to build it, helping us figure out how to fix it after it breaks, how to build it so it doesn't break, that sort of thing. The array of things, we put the first nodes in place in August of 2016 with an anticipation that they would last 2 years before we'd have to replace them. Nothing ever goes the way you expect it will go. But between 2016 and 2019, we got about 150 devices deployed. Many of them died and were replaced. And we took 4.2 billion measurements. And a lot of pretty decent science got done with those measurements, mostly around the air quality and environmental. We just kind of got rolling and just got our feet wet on edge computing and doing analysis at the edge, image analysis mostly. And I'll show you some examples of that, and then some examples that are even more exciting that we're doing with the new platform. We had to design our own architecture. We honestly, we would have preferred to just buy something that we could plug a bunch of sensors into that could live up on a pole 28 feet up, where you're not allowed to go and touch it. And so it has to pretty much run itself. Only can have remote access. Had to be secure so people couldn't easily break into it. And so we couldn't find a platform like that. So we had to design that platform. It started with a napkin at the Berghoff Cafe between Pete Beckman and myself, and has kind of grown. And you'll see through the course of the next few minutes where we've gotten, because at the end, I hope you'll see that there are opportunities for you as a person interested in computing to even use this platform at some level. We gained a lot of insights. The Array of Things was a fairly high visibility project. We talked to people from over 120 cities around the world. Not quite half of those we actually visited, or they visited us. And we ended up with, you can see the little triangles on the world map here, are discussions that we had where people said, hey, we're kind of interested in those Array of Things. Tell us more, because we've got this thing we want to measure, that thing we want to measure. And then you can see the blue circles are university deployments. The green circles are actually deployments in cities. And then pandemic hit. I started to say we deployed a bunch in 2016, 2019. We're about to deploy a whole bunch more in January of 2020, and then everything changed. And so by the time we got back to the point where we could actually deploy things in the city, we're already on to the new project, which is called SAGE. So some of the insights that we got there, I'd say that sort of told us that there were two different ways that we should think about measuring cities. One is the way that, and we're thinking of both of these ways really with the Array of Things, but we ended up focusing with the Array of Things on the left-hand side, which is new kinds of measurements like the flow of traffic, or counting the number of noise events, as opposed to just looking at, average sound over time. And so that is where we're moving with the SAGE project. These are expensive nodes. The Array of Things nodes were about $2,800 to build. We had a factory that built them for us after we did our own sort of by hand the first couple rounds. The SAGE nodes are upgraded in every way: better cameras, better processors, and they're $8,000 or $9,000 depending on how many and what kind of sensors you want. So we feel like what we learned from the Array of Things is that there does need to be these super duper edge computing platforms for many of the measurements that are important. But there's also a need for inexpensive sensors to measure. When we were talking with all these cities, and at one point I was in Phnom Penh, Cambodia, and they said, we want to measure air quality across the city. We're having transportation is changing and growing, lots more cars. They're not, good cars with, they're bad emissions. And so we want to measure air quality, and that's really all we really want to measure. And I said, well, you could buy these $2,500, $2,800 devices, but really what you need is not $100,000 devices, but $1,100 devices. And so that for measuring air pollution, for measuring noise, for measuring urban heat, these are three of the big common things that cities want to measure. And for that, you don't want 10 or 100 really expensive devices. You want thousands of inexpensive devices. So in addition to the SAGE project, we've also been working with companies like Microsoft Research on projects to put many, many sensors throughout the city, but less expensive ones. And those in particular engaging and partnering with community groups. So let me go to the right-hand side first, and then I'll spend most of our time on the left-hand side. Last summer of 2021, so summer before last, summer of 2021, after a couple of years of delay from the pandemic and discussions, we were able to get off the ground and put 115 air pollution sensors that you see here on bus shelters throughout the city, real-time API, small form factor. You can see in the middle of the screen there, solar powered. I love these devices because our devices you have to plug in, so you have to get power. Our devices are cellular, as are these, but these are totally, you can put them anywhere because you don't have to find power and get permission to use it. And we had been working with JC2Co. They operate the 2,600 bus shelters in Chicago. We'd been working with them for a couple of years, and they put some of our nodes up. And when Microsoft Research came to us, they said, hey, you guys seem to have your act together in Chicago, getting stuff up on poles and measuring the city. Can we work with you to get 100 or so of our devices up as an experiment? And we said, of course, we'd love to do that. So JC2Co really jumped in. This was a project that was really rooted in the community, in that we worked with the Environmental Law and Policy Center and a number of about half dozen community groups to vet the design. So what we first did was a analysis of roadways and topology of the city and other things that would affect air pollution. And then we did a first cut at where we would put these devices. Then we went into these communities and we said, here's what we're thinking of in terms of measuring your community. Are we missing anything? And we learned a lot from those discussions, and we changed to where we put things. There were sources that we wouldn't have been aware of without the sort of on the ground knowledge of community groups. And so we ended up with this design. Besides the fact that these don't need line power, the other thing I loved about the project was that it really was as much about community engagement as it was about measurement. With our project, the Array of Things, the National Science Foundation is like, we want you to do something for scientists and you should make the data open. Of course, we support open data, but there was no appetite in terms of funding from NSF to really go the full distance on making data legible to the community. This project really did that. So every one of these bus shelters that has one of these devices also has a sticker that you can see here. And if you scan that sticker, you're going to get a little survey, but then you do the survey and you get to this dashboard that can show you over time. You can select today or yesterday or the day before or what have you. You can look at a map of the city. And there's some educational material on there as well. So somebody that doesn't know anything about sensing or environmental sciences or air pollution can know, after looking at this app, can at least have some idea of what's happening there. So we think this is an example of the kind of project that we need to do more of. We have a new project at Argonne called the Crocus Project, which is an urban integrated field laboratory, also a community-driven science program. And so we'll take some of this and implement it there. Now, that's sort of the right-hand side, $1,100 sensors, but we still see value in these more expensive, more sophisticated edge computing devices, not just within cities, but in many, many contexts. So the SAGE project is even bigger community than the Array of Things project was. You can see just the leadership team here and the different logos in the bottom left of where we're all from. But you can also see, besides the array of things as a kind of charter member, if you will, we have the DOE Atmospheric Radiation Measurement User Facility, or ARM. We have the National Ecological Observatory Network as an NSF funded, National Science Foundation funded. It's a $500 million instrument that, among other things, has 80 towers across the United States, the continental US, Alaska, Puerto Rico, Hawaii, and these are to measure what's happening in our environment. So they're one of the partners to the SAGE project. And the idea here was to take everything we learned from the array of things and implement it and say, okay, we did the array of things. It was a cool computer science project. Can we learn from what we did there to improve our ability with that cyber infrastructure, to improve the cyber infrastructure so that it could be used by lots of scientists and it could be real cyber infrastructure, and as opposed to a bespoke artisan network of sensors or devices, which most projects, including the array of things are. In other words, can somebody take our hardware and software and implement it themselves, or do we have to be involved because it's so specialized? So the SAGE project, the array of things, was a $3 million program. SAGE is 3 times larger, and it's done now that we're almost into just finishing up year 3. It's moved the cyber infrastructure forward to much more general purpose, much more modular and adaptable to other projects. So I'd like to talk some more about that. But you can see here from the map, we're already starting to spread these devices around, and most of these deployments are not in cities, but are outside of cities. So these expensive devices, and they won't always be expensive. The edge, the $1,000, $100 devices will eventually have good computing. And so we don't say that we're not going to do edge computing at the lower end, but what we can do today with more expense with these kind of $9,000 devices gives us an idea of what we should be able to do in 5, 6, 7, 8 years with a $100 device as technology keeps moving forward. So the idea behind the SAGE project is to take the lessons from array of things of running code at the edge and say, well, it should be easy for a scientist who wants to study traffic flow or pedestrian flow, wildlife, cloud motion, or what have you, to package up, in the case of vision, we do sound as well, package up their code that say, counts a number of coyotes and push it out to our nodes, select nodes to push it to, and then run that code out there. And what we've done is built this cyber infrastructure to allow that sort of thing to happen. Now, there are a number of things that people asked us early on, why are you bothering with computing on the edge? Why don't you just send things back to the data center? We have more power. And there are a lot of reasons for doing computing at the edge, even if you take latency out, latency gets, shorter if you're doing, if you've got servers out in the 5G network that are close to you, but there are lots of reasons for doing it. Just a couple of them are listed here. With respect to, in my title, I said something about secure and trustworthy cities. Because we had cameras and edge computing, one of the advantages that we had with the Array of Things project was that our architecture supported a very strong privacy policy. And that is, here it's 3 words: process and discard. So when an image comes, when we analyze an image at an Array of Things node, we're counting the number of bicyclists or whatever, we count the number of bicyclists or whatever else we're measuring from that image, we transmit that number, that result, and then we throw the image away. So there's not this ongoing built up surveillance database that this project does. And that was only possible if you could do computing at the edge. The other, even early on, we said, scientists are going to want to do experiments with vehicles talking to intersections, with intersections having the ability to make decisions very quickly, where you don't have time to send the data back to a computing center and run a program and then get the data back. You really want something that happens in milliseconds, not hundreds of milliseconds. And so that was some of the early motivations for doing computing at the edge. And I'll say, it made the project way, way harder. It's easy to get a temperature sensor or a microphone to run fine, when it's 20 degrees below zero or when it's storming. It is very hard to get computers to be reliable when you can't touch them and they're out in the elements on poles and you expect them to run for months or years at a time. So the Sage software and hardware, the picture that we have of the world is this continuum that has devices at the left-hand side that are sensors and towers and actuators and some cases inexpensive sensors, in some cases very expensive sensors. And then you want to use edge computing where it's appropriate. And of course, you still want to use clouds and data centers as well. I'll give you some examples with Sage of how those different parts of the continuum are intended to work together. Now, here's a shot from the corner of Jackson and State. That's right near the DePaul Center. It's the only scramble crosswalk in Chicago. That was one of the things we were interested in. And you can see from this image, it's from the Sage node there, the field of view as well as the resolution are just significantly better than what we had with the array of things. With the array of things, we're using $40 cameras. The field of view pretty much just got you the sidewalks and in between here. Now we're using $1,000 cameras. We're able to pan them, which we only do in terms of just a setup of the node. We don't do that in real time. We could, but we don't. So it's a fixed view. And then we can see down the street, we can see the whole intersection. And so the questions that you can ask about this intersection are way more interesting than what you could ask about just what's happening in between the sidewalks. There are a bunch of these that are going up in Chicago. There are about a dozen of them up now. We just shipped a month or so ago 10 nodes down to Australia to work with their national laboratory. CSIRO is the acronym. And they're doing a combination of this kind of widely deployed low-cost network, but also 10 of these Sage nodes that will go in and around the city of Gold Coast. So cities around the world. And then I'll show you a kind of a neat movie of some of the environmental work. So this is a controlled burn that happened in the middle of Kansas, or sort of, eastern middle of Kansas, near Manhattan, Kansas. And the NEON project, the National Ecological Observatory, that NSF program, they were doing a controlled burn there and looking at the ecological impact of that burn. And so they were going to put a bunch of instruments up. And so we said, hey, well, why don't we send some Sage nodes out there and we'll take some measurements. So you can see in the bottom right, so bottom left, you can see the guys working on the tower. You can see the Sage node in the upper left that we deployed. That's pretty much of a standard Sage node there. Then on the right-hand side of the bottom, you can see that plume and then the infrared image. And so we were really interested in learning from this controlled burn what was possible for things like detecting wildfire conditions and even detecting wildfires. And so some of our folks went out there and took a drone with them, and so you can see the burn is happening here, and the tower in the foreground with some instruments on it from different projects. The NEON project, you can see it's got its instrument array there. And then a little lower on the pole here, you'll see a couple of the array of things nodes there. So this was the first experiment to say, can we think about going beyond just the fixed towers that are in cities or in environments and national parks or what have you, to towers that could be deployed sort of on the fly or could be moved around. And we'll need those in the city as well as we move instruments around for the Argonne project in urban heat and its impact on communities, the Crocus project I mentioned. So as a test a couple of weeks ago, maybe a month ago, a couple of our guys went out to Montana to the University of Utah's wilderness measurement station. Why it's in Montana instead of Utah, if it's the University of Utah, I don't have an explanation, but the idea was to test the notion of a redeployable tower that would have Starlink internet and would be able to have a couple of Sage nodes on it with some different instruments. And so this is the first of what we hope will be 5 of these towers that we'll deploy over the next few months as a prototyping exercise. So that's kind of hardware. And I mentioned the notion of you developing code and running it on the nodes. We've already got a pretty nice start at this edge code repository, the app store, if you will. All of these apps, you can see I've circled the little GitHub icon. So you can go to the sagecontinuum.org, Sage Continuum, all one word. So you can go to the website and look at these and go into GitHub and modify them, reuse them. They're all open source. We just had a couple of projects funded or will be funded. We're in contract negotiations. One of them is a project, and we'll be able to announce who it is, but one of them is a project to look at the impact of at-grade rail crossings. Every time a train goes through, how many vehicles are affected, what type of vehicles are affected, how long does it take for traffic to get back to steady state. And then another project where we're putting Sage nodes on bridges where they are already instrumented with accelerometers and other devices. And we want to correlate, okay, we just saw this thing with the accelerometer. What did the Sage node see? Oh, that was a motorcycle. Oh, that was a dump truck. And so those 2 projects are examples of new projects where there's no reason that those projects need to start from scratch. They can look at the traffic state estimator. There's another project, I don't think it's shown on here. We've been working with Exelon. There's a project that is looking at differentiating between vehicles. Is that an electric vehicle? Is it a regular combustion engine vehicle? Is it a ride share? Another DOE project. Is it a ride share vehicle? Is it a public transit? Is it a private vehicle? So as this code, as this app store gets more active, it will be easier and easier without having to start from scratch to do these kind of projects. A couple of other examples. This is Northern Illinois University, an undergraduate research program. They had the help of Mike Papka, who's a co-principal investigator on the Array of Things project, but still undergraduates put an Array of Things node up on campus there. You can see they did some computer vision to figure out where the pedestrians are going and how many are using the crosswalk or not using the crosswalk. So it's a pretty accessible system even before the SAGE project, the Array of Things project, for doing these kind of projects even for undergraduates. A little more sophisticated, we have a couple of scientists that are working with the microphone. Unfortunately, in the city, we don't have the microphones turned on because there's a wiretapping law in Illinois that doesn't exist in cities or in states like New York. So in New York City, you can do stuff with microphones, but not in Chicago, unfortunately. However, we can go into forest preserves and other places, and we have this AI system, this self-supervised learning system that is getting pretty good at determining the diversity of birds based on the bird sounds that it hears. So that's an example of a project using microphone. One of the, not the holy grail, but one of the sought after cups, if you will, grails in Chicago has been flooding. We're, like many cities, we have a big flooding problem. And the only way the city knows that your block is flooded is if you call them or one of your neighbors call them. There's no way to detect flooding. And so we're pretty excited as we move from Array of Things to SAGE to have this ability to start detecting with computer vision, start detecting a flooding. And so this is a pretty exciting development with SAGE, with the more powerful NVIDIA devices that are in. Another example, wildfire detection and prediction. Is that a cloud or is that a wildfire? It's a fair question. We're working with the Wi-Fi project out of UC San Diego and the University of Oregon's Hazards Laboratory, both of which have huge networks of seismographs and cameras, but no intelligence at the edge. And like the NEON sites, there's no processing out there, even though they're huge, expensive instruments. So the reason you want to move computing out to the edge, if you think about these expensive instruments that are far away from cities and they don't have decent network connectivity, is right now they're set up to make a whole bunch of assumptions and they can't react to anything interesting that happens. So imagine that the site that we have in northern Oklahoma, which is part of the Atmospheric Radiation Measurement Facility, the DOE ARM project. So that's got an expensive LiDAR that scans the horizon at low resolution, relative, it's low resolution, higher than most things we have, but at low resolution setting, it's scanning the horizon. But when it sees something interesting, so a SAGE node processing those images said, hey, that looks like an interesting cloud formation, maybe even some rotation there, it will, without human intervention, stop the LiDAR, put it into fixed mode, but high resolution. Something interesting, let's watch it. Maybe change the sampling rate or other things when something interesting happens. So a lot of interesting events are lost because the instruments are programmed remotely and don't have the ability to adapt. Now, with the Array of Things project, let's move to hardware here. With the Array of Things project, everything was bespoke and artisan made. We had them made in the factory, but there was no getting it home and taking it apart and changing the processor out or changing the sensors or what have you. It was like, if you wanted to take apart your smartphone, it's not really made for that. It's made for doing what it was, it was originally configured to do. With the SAGE nodes, first of all, the box that you see there is twice as large as the Array of Things box. We were afraid of size before, but when they get up on poles, like if you saw them up close, you'd be surprised how big that walk sign is. It's like huge. So the Array of Things nodes look pretty small. Larger box means we can change out the processor very easily, even add processors or other devices. We also made this modular. So one of the key things you see in this picture on the left is sensor expansion ports, power over Ethernet, and USB underneath. So if somebody wanted to put their own sensor on this, they wouldn't even have to, work with us. They could just buy the node, which they'd have to buy from us, but they could just plug in the power over Ethernet and have their own sampling processor. And there's documented there's a documented way that you plug your sensor in from the standpoint of what software you need to have and that sort of thing. But the other thing that we did with the SAGE project is we said, maybe people don't want to buy our nodes, and sometimes it doesn't make sense to buy our nodes. Like at a NEON site, they already have the instruments, so why not just have our software run on a Blade server? So we have a SAGE Blade that runs on things like these Dell servers. So we now run on any Linux hardware, and that also makes it easier for people to do development at home. Sort of a fun picture of the Array of Things morgue with the tag on the big toe of each of these nodes. They're way more than the ones pictured here, but we really learned a lot from just putting these devices out there and watching how they performed and diagnosing why they stopped talking to us or did something else. And we learned that one of the lessons we learned is that, building something in your lab is actually pretty easy because everything about it, or your students do. But getting a factory to build it, you have to give them more than the IKEA diagram. You have to give them more like the Lego, how to put the Millennium Falcon together in 345 steps, sort of thing. And so we continued to work with, we had this goal that the Array of Things and the SAGE nodes as well be made in Chicago land, if not in Chicago. So we've been working with Surrey Electronics out in Glendale Heights. They built all the Array of Things nodes for us, and they do these thermal testing for us. And then they also have built the SAGE nodes, and now we can say we need 10 of them shipped to Australia, and we write them a check and they send them to Australia. We have a variety of things. We even have some heat chambers at Argonne, and we've done testing outside over the winter. And so you can see we are, hoping that these things will be as resilient as the old, Bic pen commercials where they would abuse their Bic pens and that would still write. So let me sort of motor through the rest of these so we have plenty of time for questions or discussion. Software infrastructure, as I mentioned, very easy to plug in a new kind of sensor, very easy to write your edge code, you containerize it, and then we use Kubernetes for job management scheduling. Lots of different components, edge computing containers can run on any given SAGE node. There's some research that a number of us and our collaborators are doing, and the best way to do sort of rule-based scheduling. You can see in a couple of examples there, sometimes you just want to take a measurement every few minutes or few hours. Other times when a certain condition is met, you want to do some different kind of measurements, or maybe you detect something and you want to actually pull some data and send it to be computed in a model somewhere else. So maybe you take a bunch of data on wind and wildfire, and you send that data to a cloud or HPC system to run a wildfire behavior model. So say, where's that wildfire going over the next 15 minutes? It is really a managed infrastructure. We've got these really nice dashboards that we would have, these are the kind of things we dreamed about with the Array of Things project. You see this one. This is a node, again, the node at Jackson and State. I guess my favorite node because it's got the most interesting field of view. That the red line and the two red lines and the orange lines, those are, if you look closely, those are the microphone ain't working. So that's because we turned it off. So good cyber infrastructure tools. I've mentioned this Crocus project, community research on climate and urban science. Department of Energy just gave, they awarded about $70 million, 25 of it to Argonne and partners to put in place an urban integrated field laboratory, measurement, modeling, community engagement, to understand what are the impacts or what will be the impacts and what are the impacts of climate change on communities, especially vulnerable communities in cities. SAGE will be the mainstay of the architecture for measurement, including the low end and the high end. You can see we have partners around the city named here. And education is, as with the Array of Things, is going to be part of Crocus as well. Here's an example. I don't know if you can hear the background music. It's a little distracting for me, but we've done this project with Lane Tech High School for the past 6 years. Over 1,000 students have learned how to build their own wireless sensor nodes. You can see in the movie there just one year where they built these devices. The pictures in the bottom and the upper left are from Wrigley Field, where we worked with the Cubs organization to put a bunch of sensors around Wrigley after they did the remodel. So that's one of our programs, and we've built some other programs learning from that. Another is we now have this $300 kit. And by the way, $300 is a huge amount of money for most students in most schools. Even the $50 Lane of Things kits were beyond the means of many of the schools that we worked with. So, groups like ACM, maybe want to adopt a school and buy some kits for them. But and by the way, we're not making profit on these, so I'm not trying to sell kits, but I am trying to sell getting kids excited about wireless sensing and edge computing. And so you can see we have this this device that's built on the NVIDIA Nano. We've already done a bunch of different programs. You can see here we've been shooting for a very good diversity to increase the diversity of the workforce, particularly the tech workforce in Chicago, which is woefully non-diverse. We've been doing hackathons with small groups to just test, do our instructions really work? Do the Jupyter notebooks crash? Before we roll it out to larger groups. This was a hackathon last summer with a half dozen students, and lots of projects that are possible and that are interesting, many more than are listed here. So there's lots of opportunity to get involved. We have been running since 2011. I think we didn't start taking group pictures, I guess, until 2013. But every summer at Argonne we have a summer cohort of undergraduates and graduates, and we'll continue to do that and probably expand it. We always take them kayaking at least one day of the year, and so you can see this is our kayaking crew from this year. So look, it's right at 6:45. I'm going to stop here and thank you. And then I'll unshare my screen and we can just talk, and you can ask questions or I guess you can't really throw things, but you can speak up.
Thank you very much, Charlie, for that very, very interesting talk. So we have time for Q&A. I think I'll start with Greg. I think you had a question for Charlie.
I was wondering, do the Sage nodes have any output capabilities, like a light or a speaker, or are they ever wired up to nearby objects, like opening a gate or lighting up a sign or something?
That is a great question. And early on in the Array of Things project, we had all these, we were working with the School of the Art Institute of Chicago. They were really involved and still are involved in our project. These are urban planners, architects, and sensor guys and people. And we wanted to put lights on it. There are lights on it so we can walk up and at least see if it's running. And there's some codes that we can blink ourselves with those lights if it's not answering the phone, because for security reasons, there's no open ports on these, so you can't connect to an Array of Things or Sage node. It has to connect back to you. So that, so the answer is no, but it's not for lack of wanting to do it. We just never sort of got the time to focus on that. But as we go from Array of Things to Sage, the fact that we've got power over Ethernet and USB means that a totally valid project would be somebody saying, hey, I want to put a light, a bell or speaker, what have you, on the Sage nodes, and I need to just plug it into PoE or to the USB. So there are lots of projects that I didn't even talk about here that could be done, as you rightly point out, that really expands the horizons for what you could do. We are doing some things with the Gold Coast, Australia folks, the CSIRO people, with LoRaWAN devices that might want to talk to the Sage node. Not so, it's not so much needed in cities. You might as well just talk to the cellular network if you're in a city. But if you're way out in Utah or Montana, there's some advantage to being able to talk to the node as well. So great question, and thanks for rubbing salt in this wound that I have. Like, I would really love to see those applications. So
great, thank you. Mark, there's some questions I see from the audience on the Q&A. Could you go ahead and address them?
Sure. Oh, and by the way, I want to mention, Charlie, that in a previous, when you had that photo of at Lane Tech, Jeff Solon, he was one of our previous speakers on a few occasions.
And, excellent. Yeah, Jeff and Dan Law is the other guy there. Jeff and Dan are there. We actually tried to replicate that program in other schools, and we figured out that we could find 4 musicians from Liverpool, but we couldn't reproduce the Beatles. Those guys are just amazing. With Dan and Jeff, we could do things that most high schools, can't do. So,
right. So our first question is, are there any ethical concerns currently, or ones that you foresee with the use of the Sage nodes?
Well, I'll say the first Array of Things proposal, which didn't get funded, it was well reviewed, but they said we can only fund one project that's more than $1 million this year, and we're going to fund these other guys. So come back next year, which we did. That first proposal, we didn't have cameras or microphones because I was afraid of that the privacy and ethics would just consume us. But then our scientist friends talked us into putting microphones and cameras on. And so from the very beginning, we're like, okay, if we're going to do this, how do we do it right? And people said, why don't you just skip that, because privacy is going to be too hard? And we said, the reason we can't skip it is because if academics don't figure out how to do it ethically and with privacy in mind, who is going to do it? Companies don't have a motivation to do that. I mean, they might in their corporate social responsibility, but they're making money. So there's no privacy policy that you can see in Starbucks with their cameras. You don't have any idea what they're doing with that. So a couple of things. Number one, are we surveilling people? And we decided if we're going to have cameras, we're not going to do anything that would cause us to be in a surveillance situation. We got a letter a while back from somebody claiming to be a lawyer for somebody else who had a car wreck, and they were like telling us we have to send them the images from the Array of Things node at that corner. We didn't have an Array of Things node at the corner, But even if we did, the answer was, but they were gone the minute that we analyzed them. So we don't have any images to show you. So that was one thing. I think ethics is also about when you put something in neighborhoods, do the people who live there, are they okay with it? And even more so, are they positive about it? And so we think, when we go into a neighborhood, we think that ethically we need to talk to the people there and say, we're not just observing you. What is it that you want to measure? And are there things that we have as common ground? So, and then I've already mentioned the wiretap law. We're sort of trying to figure out if there's some way that we can do sound analysis in the city without breaking the spirit or the letter of that law. Because, when we test our microphones, we're not able to hear people speaking. And so if we don't, in the same way that we don't do facial recognition by policy, if we don't do, voice recognition, does that mean that we're okay with the wiretap laws? I don't know the answer to that, but these are ethical questions that we've got always.
What processors do you use in the nodes?
Those are NVIDIA Xaviers, and we've got some ARM processors in there as well. So it's the NVIDIA are the super duper, lots and lots of GPUs, and so the processors in the array of things nodes were Odroids. Odroid is kind of like if you here's a Raspberry Pi. Odroid's about the same size but much more powerful. And we used Odroids partly because the Raspberry Pi, you could through USB you could put a SSD on it, but it's really running on this micro SD card, and those things wear out. So we went the Odroid because it had an eMMC card, and so we had two storage devices. And so if and when the micro SD card went belly up, and we assume it would eventually, then we would have a fallback as well. So
we have the interest of the National Institutes of Health around a software-defined radio MRI system. I presented before. This is from Martin O'Shield. That he presented before the Department of Defense's MXD on Goose Island, and was wondering how to implement our SDR, software-defined radio technologies, with what you're doing, as the NSF is highly favorable towards SDR technology.
We've talked to a number of folks doing software-defined radio, SDR. And most of the time, the challenge that they've had is that their antennas are huge, big, and bulky and unwieldy. And maybe that's changed now. I have an SDR antenna downstairs that's like this big, but the ones that the spectrum analyzing guys want to use are typically very, very, big. And so we kind of shied away from that because most of the time the Department of Transportation, CDOT, and the Division of Electrical Operations, the guys that take care of the signal lights, the red walk lights, those guys have this, now after doing a couple hundred installs, they have this installation down to an art or to a science, and asking them to also put this big antenna on would involve safety issues and other things. So my advice to the SDR community would be to try to get deals on rooftops, although that can be expensive if you have to pay for it. But we're happy to talk, more. We just haven't talked to that community for a while. So happy to talk more about it.
Can the nodes communicate with Google Maps, since Google Maps has layers for fires and other natural disasters?
So think of the nodes as information gatherers and analyzers, and they're analyzing the data that they have. They could, in fact, if you were to write edge code that accessed other data, there's certainly no reason that you couldn't do that. There's a limited amount of bandwidth because they're cellular connected, but limited keeps changing as cellular gets better. So that's just so the answer is yes, they could. We just haven't done that. And at the same time, our data is all open. The APIs are published and open. And so anybody that wants to combine our data with other data, whether it's Google Maps or other, that's pretty straightforward to do. In fact, most of the time when we do analyze data, like when we're doing analysis of air pollution data, we're not just analyzing the data that comes from the array of things node. We're also looking at traffic patterns and other data sources. So the array of things nodes or the SAGE nodes, that data almost always gets combined with other data to do the analysis.
Well, thank you very much for your questions, and thanks, Charlie, for answering them. So I just put into the chat, I've opened up a poll. So we like to value your feedback on all of our ACM Chicago events. So if you have a chance, please come submit that feedback so we can be able to take that and improve our future events. So I'll go ahead and share my screen here before we finish off. Okay, so we're looking for upcoming speakers. So if you yourself, want to talk about, the stuff that you are doing, or of anybody that could be a possible good speaker for ACM Chicago and IEEE Computer Society Chicago, please let us know. So you can email us vicechair@chicagoacm.org or chair@chicagoacm.org. So yeah, if you have any speakers or yourself wants to speak, please let us know. We are very welcome to have different speakers from different disciplines to talk about their work. And like I said earlier, all of our videos, when we finish processing the recordings, are all available on this YouTube channel. You can also search for ACM Chicago in YouTube, and you'll be able to so you can see we had one, like I mentioned in the chat, we had one on ACM and IEEE Chicago on supercomputing and the Argonne Leadership Computing Facility, of which Michael Papko was our speaker. And of course, we also had Jeff Solon that Mark talked about, who talked about collaborative digital making from Lane Tech. And we also had someone too from NVIDIA too as well. So you can see we've had many different speakers from different organizations talking about very interesting topics. And also as well, we're always looking for more volunteers. I mean, this is what makes us, successful and keeps us going. So if you are interested in helping out, contributing your skill sets, we need for people, for example, for writing or planning, videography, audio, and editing is very important. So we have some professional quality, videos. We also looking for people to help network with future speakers and topics, and also as well, if you want to bring something back to the community, in terms of computing technologies, this is the platform for doing so. All right, so I think this pretty much ends our evening, and we are just right on time. So I'd like to thank again Charlie for wonderful talk. And Charlie, I think you can provide a copy of your slides to the audience. Is that okay?
Yeah.
Okay,
I'll send you one. I'll send you one.
Okay, sure, that'll be very great then. Yeah. So. And also as well, like I said, there will be a recording. You will receive that in your email. And also as well, if you need a professional development hour for those people who are wanting to get their professional engineering, that will be provided to as well in the email. Okay, so that's it from me and from the ACM Chicago and IEEE Computer Society team. So again, thank you everybody for coming out here this evening, and please keep on a lookout for our next webinar event. We're planning one for November, but you will see in your email or on the meetup group when that will be. So we're planning to have one before the Thanksgiving. Okay, thank you very much, everyone.
Thank you.
Enjoy the rest of your evening. Stay healthy, stay safe, and we'll see you at a future event. Thank you.